Chapter 1. The sun shone brightly through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Cathedral, casting a kaleidoscope of colors on the polished marble floor. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense and wax, as the soft murmur of voices reverberated throughout the cavernous space. Among the throng of important people in the realm, celebrities and movie stars, Gabriella stood alone, feeling vulnerable and exposed. "Let it be known," the Archbishop began, his sonorous words echoing off the walls, "that today we gather to crown our beloved Princess Gabriella as Queen of this great nation." His voice bounced around the cathedral, swallowed up by opulent tapestries that adorned the walls. Despite the warmth of the flickering candlelight, Gabriella felt a chill crawl down her spine. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she thought she might be sick. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself she was surrounded by loyal subjects who had come to witness her crowning. As the coronation procedure commenced, Gabriella swore an oath to uphold the law and church, her voice shaking ever so slightly. Next, she was anointed with holy oil, the cool liquid sliding down her forehead, followed by being presented with the majestic regalia, a symbol of her newfound authority. Lastly, the Archbishop placed the heavy golden crown upon her head, marking the beginning of a new era. "Long live the Queen!" cried the crowd, their collective voices nearly drowning out the creaking of time-worn wooden benches and shuffling of feet on the stone floor. Gabriella bowed before her loyal subjects, feeling the weight of the crown and their expectations bearing down upon her. As she exited the cathedral in a royal procession, she couldn't help but feel lonely and naked in front of everyone watching her. Outside, TV cameras were positioned in front of the stairs leading down from the large oak doors to the street below, their lenses trained on her every move. Gabriella tried to maintain a regal posture and confident demeanor, but the constant scrutiny made her feel even more exposed and vulnerable. The moment Gabriella stepped out of the cathedral, she was assaulted by a sea of reporters. Their numbers seemed to stretch on endlessly, like a pack of hungry wolves waiting for their prey. Dressed in crisp suits and skirts, they wielded their microphones and cameras as if they were weapons, ready to capture every detail. "Your Majesty," one reporter addressed her, his tone respectful yet probing as he held out a microphone. "How do you plan to honor your parents' legacy?" Gabriella hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to the TV cameras, realizing that her words would be broadcasted across the nation. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their gazes upon her. "Your Majesty!" shouted another reporter, pushing her way through the crowd, her heels clicking aggressively against the cobblestones. "How does it feel to lose your parents so suddenly? Can you tell us about the airplane malfunction that led to their deaths?" Yet another chimed in, his tone both probing and demanding. "Is there anything you would like to say about your parents' legacy?" a fourth questioned, her voice dripping with insinuation. Gabriella tried to focus on the faces before her, but they all blurred together, becoming an indistinguishable mass of eager expressions, perfectly coiffed hair, and gleaming white teeth. The scent of their strong perfumes and colognes mingled with the sharp odor of fresh ink from the newspapers they clutched in their hands, creating an overwhelming cloud of stimuli that threatened to suffocate her. "Please," she whispered, fighting to maintain her composure, one question at a time. "Very well, Your Majesty," the first reporter relented, though the predatory glint in her eyes remained. "Tell us, how do you plan to address the issue of the airplane malfunction that caused your parents' tragic deaths?" Gabriella felt her heart constrict in her chest, the memory of that fateful day still raw and painful. She took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of St. Mary's Cathedral behind her, the faint aroma of incense providing a brief moment of solace. "I will ensure that a thorough investigation is conducted," she answered, her voice steady despite the inner turmoil that threatened to consume her. "It is my duty as the new queen to ensure that such a tragedy never occurs again." "Your Majesty," the second reporter pressed, sensing her vulnerability, "how are you coping with the loss of your parents? Do you feel prepared to take on their responsibilities?" "Enough!" Gabriella snapped, her anger momentarily overpowering her grief. "I am here to honor my parents' memory and to serve my people. Let us focus on the future and not dwell on the past." The reporters exchanged glances among themselves, but their expressions quickly turned from surprise to determination, unwilling to back down. "Very well, Your Majesty," the third reporter said, her voice soft but persistent. "What do you hope to achieve during your reign to carry on your parents' legacy?" Gabriella hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with thoughts of all the expectations placed upon her. Then she took another deep breath, focusing on the cool breeze that gently caressed her face, giving her the strength to continue. "I will strive to bring peace and prosperity to our nation, just as my parents did," she declared, her voice resolute. "Their love for our people will live on through me, and I will do everything in my power to make them proud." With those words, Gabriella turned and walked away from the relentless sea of reporters, leaving behind the barrage of questions and the overwhelming weight of their scrutiny. As she retreated into the sanctuary of the cathedral, she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey as queen, and that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and heartache. But she also knew that she had the strength to persevere, for the love of her parents and the people who depended on her. After gathering her strength with 2 deep breaths, she decided that she was again ready for the vultures outside and walked through the wooden oak portal again. The sunlight glinted off the reporters' cameras, blinding Gabriella as she raised a trembling hand to shield her eyes. As their questions continued to flood towards her, she fought against the mounting wave of emotions threatening to overcome her. She could feel the tightness in her chest constricting with each breath, and her voice wavered as she struggled to find the right words. "Your Majesty, can you tell us more about the findings of the ongoing investigation into the airplane crash that killed your parents?" one reporter asked, his pen poised above his notepad, ready to transcribe her response. Gabriella swallowed hard, feeling the knot in her throat tighten. The scent of the cathedral's incense still clung to her, a bitter reminder of the solemn ceremony she had just completed. Her heart pounded so fiercely that she feared it might drown out her own thoughts, but she took a deep breath, inhaling the fragrant aroma of the nearby flowers, and steadied herself before answering. "According to the investigators," she began, her voice barely audible above the clicking of cameras and scribbling of pens, "the cause of the crash has been traced back to a malfunctioning sensor on the airplane. It seems that the sensor failed to detect an impending stall, which ultimately led to the loss of control and the tragic accident." Her hands gripped the edge of her ornate gown, the delicate lace biting into her skin as she sought some semblance of control over her emotions. The soft rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of the crowd offered a momentary reprieve from the relentless barrage of questions, but the weight of her grief remained ever present. "Has anyone been held accountable for this error?" another reporter asked, his tone sharpened by the implication of blame. Gabriella hesitated, her mind racing through an internal debate. There was a part of her that wanted to lash out, to find someone to hold responsible for the heart-wrenching loss of her parents. But she knew that assigning blame would not bring them back, and it was her duty as queen to remain composed and dignified in the face of such adversity. "Though the investigation is still ongoing," she said carefully, "it is important to remember that accidents can happen, even under the most stringent safety precautions. At this time, our focus should be on honoring the memory of my beloved parents and working together to ensure a safer future for all." As she spoke these words, Gabriella felt the first tendrils of resolve take root within her. It was a fragile sensation, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a stormy sky, but it was enough to bolster her spirits and help her face the challenges ahead. "Queen Gabriella, do you believe the maintenance crew or the airplane manufacturer should be held responsible for this tragedy?" a bespectacled reporter inquired, her pen poised above her notepad. Gabriella's heart clenched like a vice around her chest, and she fought to keep her breathing steady. The sea of faces before her seemed to close in on her, their expressions expectant, eager for her answer. She could feel the eyes of the world watching, scrutinizing her every move, analyzing her every word. And yet, amidst the chaos, she found herself focusing on the scent of roses that wafted through the air from a nearby garden, a subtle reminder of her mother's favorite flower. "Let us not forget," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "that while it is natural to want to assign blame, we must not make rash judgments until all the facts are known." She paused, collecting her thoughts, feeling as though the weight of the crown upon her head had quintupled. "Moreover," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the throng of reporters, "it is essential that we strive for unity in the face of such loss, rather than allowing ourselves to be torn apart by finger-pointing and recriminations. I trust that the investigation will reveal the truth and appropriate actions will be taken. Your Majesty, would the kingdom consider seeking compensation from those who may be found responsible for the airplane malfunction?" another reporter pressed. A bitter taste rose in Gabriella's mouth, and she clenched her fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. Was it truly so easy for them to reduce her parents' lives to a matter of money and blame? But she knew she could not let her frustration show, not when she was the figurehead of an entire nation. "Compensation cannot replace what has been lost," she replied slowly, her voice tinged with barely concealed emotion. "Our priority is to prevent such a tragedy from happening again and to ensure that my parents' legacy of love and benevolence lives on." As the questions continued relentlessly, Gabriella fought to maintain her composure, treading a fine line between revealing her heartache and upholding her regal dignity. With each answer, she felt as though she was baring her soul for all to see, the rawness of her grief exposed like an open wound. But beneath it all, a flicker of determination burned like a candle in the darkness, ignited by the memory of her parents' unwavering love and devotion. It was this flame that kept her standing tall, even as her heart threatened to shatter into 1,000 pieces, and it was this flame that would guide her through the stormy seas that lay ahead. Queen Gabriella stood before the throng of reporters, her heart pounding in her chest like a caged bird desperate to escape. With each question fired at her, she felt her chest tightening and her stomach churning. The exhaustion was evident on her face. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights spent grappling with her addiction and grief. "Your Majesty, how do you plan to lead your people when you're struggling with your own demons?" a reporter shouted, his voice cutting through the air like a dagger. Gabriella's voice wavered as she answered, becoming increasingly hoarse with each query. I am doing my best," she managed to say, her throat dry and aching. "Can you truly devote yourself to your duties while dealing with your personal issues?" another reporter asked, relentless in their pursuit for answers. The rapid-fire questions were taking their toll on Gabriella. Each one felt like a punch to the gut, leaving her winded and gasping for breath. Her hands shook as she gripped the sides of the podium, knuckles turning white from the pressure. Her vision blurred, and she struggled to maintain her composure amidst the barrage of inquiries. The deafening roar that had previously filled the air around the cathedral was gone. A few moments ago, thousands of people had been cheering, and yet at present, the space was now engulfed in silence. As Gabriella scanned the assembled faces, she could feel the stares of pity and curiosity combined. Her gaze swept through the audience, hoping to find anyone or anything that might aid her in her plight. Her eyes fell on a girl of maybe 8 years old, standing next to her father, tugging on his sleeve. "Daddy, why is that lady crying?" the little girl asked, pointing towards Gabriella with a bewildered expression. "Your Majesty, there are rumors that you've been seeking solace in the company of a young girl. What can you tell us about her?" A reporter's voice broke the silence, daring to tread into more personal territory. "Enough!" a voice boomed from the sidelines. Lady Helena, Gabriella's trusted advisor, had realized that Queen Gabriella didn't have a press secretary to help her with the press. She stormed towards the stage, her eyes blazing with anger. "You have hounded Her Majesty enough for today!" The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices a low hum of support. A ripple of encouragement spread through the crowd, as if they were collectively holding Gabriella up when she could no longer stand on her own. "Stay strong, Your Majesty," whispered one of her guards, a look of genuine concern etched across his face. Gathering her strength, Gabriella offered the crowd a weak smile and nodded her thanks before stepping away from the podium. She felt their supportive gazes follow her as she made her way down the stairs towards the limousine, each step heavier than the last. Drawing in a shuddering breath, Gabriella hesitated for a moment. She glanced back at the expectant faces of the crowd, their eyes urging her to reveal the truth. The weight of their collective expectations threatened to crush her, but she knew that honesty was the only way forward. "Wait," she said softly, turning back towards the podium. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by a newfound resolve. Steadying herself, she addressed the reporter's question head-on. "Denise is a good friend of mine. She is someone who has helped me through one of the darkest periods of my life, and I am determined to honor the legacy of my dear parents' memory and serve my country as they did." The reporters leaned in, their pens poised to capture every word. The room was hushed, hanging on Gabriella's every syllable. A reporter interrupted the silence, asking Her Majesty a daring yet personal question. "Is this friend the same Denise that has a drug charge pending?" At that, Lady Helena grabbed hold of Gabriella's arm and beckoned her towards the car. "Thank you all for your support," she continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I promise to do everything in my power to be the leader you deserve." With that final declaration, Queen Gabriella stepped away from the podium once more. The crowd erupted into applause, but to Gabriella, the sound seemed more like the courtesy applause after a bad performance rather than the adulation of success. As she made her way to the car, her heart swelled with grief and disappointment as emotional exhaustion threatened to topple her. Lady Helena forced a smile and tried to look pleased, but her brows were knitted together in disapproval. She took a deep breath and said, "You did well," though her voice betrayed her with a disappointed tone that betrayed the disastrous result of the meeting with the press. Gabriella sat silently in the limousine, her gaze fixed at the cold glass of the window. Her gaze was blank, reflecting the outside world with no emotion as it whizzed past. Lady Helena shifted cautiously on the seat beside her, then cleared her throat. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "it is our fault. We had completely forgotten that you don't have a press secretary. Your father, the king, never required one as he was so—" Her words faltered as she noticed the single tear streaming down Gabriella's cheek. It glistened against her dress, seemingly being a part of it, as it broke away and gently tumbled down, landing on her lapel.